Section 1. Iran escalates in oil markets. Jolt, the host, opens with a stark claim that the Pentagon's own review found the first Iranian attack on U.S. troops was so much worse than they let on. But he quickly widens the frame to the broader regional crisis. He describes a Middle East conflict that is no longer confined to airstrikes between Iran, Israel, and the United States. Gulf states including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, and Oman reportedly said their forces intercepted drones and missiles, while Oman also reported drone strikes and fuel tank attacks at a southern port. A British maritime monitoring group said 3 commercial ships in or near the Strait of Hormuz were hit by projectiles within hours of each other. The host emphasizes that the Strait of Hormuz is Iran's greatest point of leverage because roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through it. He argues that even partial disruption has already rattled markets. Oil prices surged to nearly $120 a barrel at their peak, the highest level since 2022, before easing to around $91. Even after that pullback, he notes, prices remain sharply above the sub-73 level from before the war. One Iranian official even warned the world to get ready for oil hitting $200 a barrel. The host stresses that Europe and Asia are more exposed because they rely more heavily on Middle Eastern energy, but he says the United States is already feeling the blowback. Gas prices have risen for 11 straight days, with the national average reaching $3.58 a gallon, according to AAA. He adds a personal observation that diesel near him was $5.18. In his telling, financial markets are reacting not only to military developments, but to President Trump's own inconsistent rhetoric. Trump has said the war is not a forever war and is pretty much done, yet the host says those claims repeatedly conflict with worsening facts on the ground. That contradiction becomes a core theme. The host frames the crisis as a collision between volatile battlefield realities and political messaging designed to calm the public. He suggests the administration wants Americans to believe the conflict is nearing resolution, while indicators from shipping lanes, missile interceptions, and energy prices point the other direction. By beginning here, he sets up the rest of the episode as an argument that official narratives on war, readiness, and consequences have not matched reality. Section 2. The Strait of Hormuz and a confused U.S. response. The host then focuses on the maritime choke point at the center of the crisis, the Strait of Hormuz. He explains that the United States has considered escorting merchant ships through the strait, a tactic with precedent from the late 1980s during earlier tensions with Iran. But he portrays the current response as muddled and reactive rather than planned. Energy Secretary Chris Wright briefly claimed on social media that a Navy warship had successfully escorted an oil tanker, then deleted the post. Meanwhile, the Navy has reportedly been denying industry requests for escorts on a near-daily basis. Other countries, including Pakistan and France, are said to be exploring escort options, but the host notes that no broad international system has materialized. At the same time, intelligence reports suggest the situation could deteriorate rapidly. The U.S. reportedly received intelligence that Iran was preparing to lay mines in the strait. One unnamed official told the New York Times none had been laid yet, but preparations were underway. CNN sources were more alarming, saying at least a few dozen mines were already in place. According to those reports, Iran still retains 80 to 90% of its small boats and mine-laying capability, meaning it could seed hundreds of mines in the waterway within days. Trump responded online by saying that if Iran had placed mines in the Hormuz Strait, and we have no reports of them doing so, they should be removed immediately. The host highlights the contradiction built into that statement, a threat premised on something the president simultaneously claimed had not been confirmed. Trump also said 10 mine-laying vessels had been destroyed, and Pete Hegseth declared, "We will not allow terrorists to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage." By day's end, U.S. Central Command said the number of eliminated mining vessels had risen to 16. The host's main point is not that these actions are meaningless, but that no one seems able to explain whether they have meaningfully reduced Iran's capacity to keep escalating. He presents the administration as publicly improvising, while the private sector, allied governments, and shipping operators are forced to act as though a prolonged disruption is likely. That gap between confident statements and unresolved vulnerability reinforces his broader criticism. The White House seems to be narrating control without demonstrating it. The strait, in his framing, is. Section 3. Strategic reserves, Russian windfalls, and Iran's oil paradox. With the threat to shipping lanes unresolved, the international response has shifted toward emergency energy management. The host reports that Japan, Germany, and Austria announced releases from their strategic reserves, followed by the International Energy Agency, saying its 32 member states would carry out the largest coordinated stock release in history. He cites the figure as 400 barrels, though the intent is clearly a massive emergency drawdown. He notes this is also the first such IEA intervention since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The host argues that these emergency releases show governments are preparing for sustained instability, not a quick end to the war. He also underlines a geopolitical irony. Countries outside the Gulf, especially sanctioned exporters, are benefiting from the disruption. Russia, in particular, is presented as a major winner because it has oil to sell that is not trapped behind the Strait of Hormuz. Citing an economist and historian at Cornell speaking to Axios, the host says sanctioned Russian oil is now trading at a premium to the global benchmark. The quoted line is striking. If you're a Russian oil trader or a Russian company, you have never earned as much money selling oil as right now because of the supply chain interruption. Even Iran, he notes, is weirdly sort of benefiting in one respect. Despite the war, the country is reportedly exporting more oil through the Strait of Hormuz than before. The host suggests the U.S. could likely cripple that capacity at any time, but has deliberately chosen not to. American forces have reportedly struck around 5,000 targets in and around Iran, yet they have avoided major oil infrastructure, especially Karg Island, which handles about 90% of Iran's oil exports. The reasons for that restraint are economic and political. An expert cited by The Guardian warned that hitting Karg Island could trigger an economy-shaping oil price spike that would not quickly reverse. The host also says the Trump administration has asked Israel not to strike Iranian energy facilities further. Reported White House reasoning includes three concerns. Such attacks would harm ordinary Iranians who may oppose the regime. Trump wants to work with Iran's oil sector after the war in a Venezuela-style approach, and attacks on oil infrastructure could provoke wider retaliation across the Gulf. He describes Trump's view of strikes on energy targets as a doomsday option. Section 4. Trump's mixed messaging and growing political backlash. The host then turns to the political fog surrounding the war's goals and timeline. He argues that the Trump administration has repeatedly shifted its explanation for the conflict. Trump at one point called for Iran's unconditional surrender, while also suggesting the U.S. had already accomplished its mission by decimating Iran's military. Later, he said the war would end soon because there was practically nothing left to target, adding, "Anytime I want it to end, it will end." The host contrasts that confidence with reports from American and Israeli officials that they are preparing for at least 2 more weeks of strikes. Other Israeli officials told Reuters there was no sign the U.S. was close to ending the campaign, while Israel's defense minister said the operation would continue without any time limit. The host presents that jumble of statements as evidence that no one can clearly articulate the war's endgame. Senate Democrats, he notes, have demanded testimony under oath from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, arguing they have failed to explain the war's objectives, scope, and endpoint. That demand fits the host's larger argument that the administration launched into conflict without a coherent public rationale and has been backfilling explanations ever since. He gives special attention to Joe Rogan, framing the podcaster's criticism as politically symbolic. Rogan, who helped normalize Trump for many listeners, said the war felt like a betrayal of the promise of no more wars and these stupid, senseless wars. The host quotes Rogan asking why the U.S. got involved in a conflict that we can't even really clearly define why we did it. For the host, Rogan's complaint matters because it comes from someone aligned with the broader populist anti-intervention message that helped Trump politically. The broader takeaway is that the administration may now be colliding with expectations it created. Trump sold himself as the leader who would avoid endless foreign entanglements, yet the host argues that voters are seeing another vaguely defined Middle East war, spiking gas prices, and contradictory statements about whether victory has already been achieved. The tension is not merely between hawks and doves, it is between campaign branding and governing reality. By placing Rogan's frustration alongside Democratic oversight demands, the host suggests the war is generating criticism from very different corners. That convergence matters because it signals. Section 5. Casualties, Pentagon readiness, and the cost to U.S. troops. The host's harshest criticism arrives when he discusses military preparedness and casualty reporting. He argues the administration was completely unprepared for the consequences of the war and that Iran has proved more capable than expected. He says the White House was not ready to evacuate personnel, had no serious plan to handle rising gas prices until after the fact, and lacked a workable strategy for reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Senator Chris Murphy is cited saying that after a briefing he concluded the administration had no plan to safely reopen the waterway, and that this was 100% foreseeable. Senior defense officials, according to the host, told the New York Times that Iran learned more from the previous 12-day war over the summer than the Pentagon had anticipated. During that earlier conflict, the U.S. used between 100 and 250 interceptors, accounting for 20% to 50% of Pentagon inventory, as well as 80 SM-3 missiles, nearly one-fifth of stockpiles. The host says Iran appears to have identified those constraints and is now targeting air defense, radar systems, and communications infrastructure to strain regional defenses further. Iranian-backed militias have also reportedly attacked hotels frequented by American troops. Then comes the core revelation. Official casualty reporting appears incomplete. The host says at least 7 service members have been killed, including 6 in a drone attack in Kuwait. The government had said roughly 140 were injured, including some with life-threatening injuries. But CBS reported that the Kuwait drone strike was much worse than originally disclosed. On March 1, officials said 5 were seriously wounded and others suffered minor shrapnel injuries and concussions. According to the newer reporting, however, dozens are suffering brain trauma, shrapnel wounds, and burns, and more than 30 were still hospitalized as of Tuesday night. He connects that underreporting directly to the episode's title-worthy accusation that the Pentagon lied to you. Even where he avoids claiming deliberate falsification in every detail, he strongly implies that the public was given a minimized version of the truth. The discrepancy matters because traumatic brain injuries, memory loss, and long-term rehabilitation needs radically change how the public understands the human cost of war. The host also notes that Iran is threatening attacks on financial institutions doing business with the U.S. or Israel and may have launched cluster munitions at Israel, which could violate the laws of Section 6. Lebanon, Hezbollah, and a new front on the brink. The host argues that one of the most undercovered but potentially explosive dimensions of the war is Lebanon. He says that while Iran dominates headlines, a huge battle may be brewing with Hezbollah. Overnight, Israel issued evacuation warnings and launched strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, known Hezbollah strongholds. Israeli forces also struck the southern city of Tyre, claiming to have hit another Hezbollah command center. Lebanon's health ministry, however, said at least 3 civilians were killed there, including a paramedic. Reports on the total death toll from the latest sweeping strikes ranged from around 20 to as many as 36. The host focuses on one especially significant escalation: Israel striking a residential apartment block in central Beirut. Even amid mixed reporting on casualties, he stresses the symbolism and danger of hitting the heart of a dense urban capital where civilians and government officials live. Hezbollah, for its part, claimed attacks on Israeli troops near the southern border and launched rockets into Israel. The IDF said these operations reflect Hezbollah's broader effort to target Israeli civilians and argued the group is lashing out because Israel has damaged its capabilities. But the host insists the war's impact extends far beyond Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Lebanese officials say 570 people have been killed, including 86 children, 45 women, and 21 paramedics, while another 1,444 have been injured. More than 750,000 people have reportedly been displaced in just the first 12 days since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. A UN humanitarian coordinator called the displacement unprecedented. The host explains why Hezbollah presents such a difficult problem inside Lebanon. It is both an Iran-backed militant force and a deeply embedded political actor with cabinet positions, parliamentary seats, and one of the country's most capable armed organizations. That dual role means war with Hezbollah becomes war around the Lebanese state, if not against it. He reminds viewers that only 15 months have passed since a ceasefire ended the previous Hezbollah-Israel conflict, which killed 4,000 and caused more than $11 billion in damage. He also notes that Israel has reportedly violated the 2024 ceasefire more than 10,000 times and killed over 100 civilians while continuing to target Hezbollah. At the same time, he says Hezbollah escalated by launching strikes on Israel in retaliation for the joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. The result, in his framing, is Section 7. Lebanon turns on Hezbollah as peace efforts stall. The host continues the Lebanon thread by emphasizing growing domestic backlash against Hezbollah. Government officials and civilians are increasingly blaming the group for dragging the entire country into another war. In response to Hezbollah's strikes after the attack on Iran, Lebanon's cabinet reportedly voted to declare its military activities illegal and ban further military action. But Hezbollah kept fighting, signaling that its military wing is not meaningfully constrained by the state or even fully by its own political branch. That breakdown raises fears of a much larger confrontation. Reuters reported that Hezbollah fighters are bracing for a full-scale Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon. Simultaneously, Israeli military leaders have reportedly transferred troops from Gaza to the Lebanese border and outlined plans for a deeper ground incursion. The host says many experts believe Israel may be using the war as an opportunity to pursue a long-term goal, dismantling Hezbollah entirely. Lebanon's president, in what the host calls a remarkable statement, blamed Hezbollah for betraying the country and called for internationally mediated direct talks with Israel. The Lebanese government reportedly approached the U.S. ambassador to Turkey to seek mediation, and Israel allegedly said some Hezbollah members might be open to a deal. But the host says there is little sign that either Israel or the United States wants to facilitate peace. Sources told Axios the Israeli government rejected the outreach as too late and said the focus is now on eliminating Hezbollah. That message has reportedly been echoed by Israeli officials who say the only path to ending the war is for the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey is also said to have pushed disarmament as a prerequisite for talks. The host's read is blunt. Peace is being discussed in theory, but escalation is what is actually being prepared in practice. His deeper point is that Lebanon is trapped between a militia more powerful than the state, an Israeli campaign that sees strategic opportunity in war, and an American posture aligned more with military goals than de-escalation. Even when Lebanese officials reach for diplomacy, they encounter demands that are likely impossible to satisfy in the short term. That makes continued conflict the default outcome. The host uses this to reinforce one of the episode's central themes. Institutions are pretending they still control events that are rapidly outgrowing them. Section 8. Kristi Noems' DHS exit and a department in disarray shifting to domestic politics. The host says Kristi Noem appears set to leave the Department of Homeland Security in chaos after Trump effectively pushed her out, even if it was framed publicly as a promotion. By the time she departs on March 31, he says, dozens of contracts may still be piled on her desk because of a policy she imposed requiring personal approval for any DHS contract worth more than $100,000. The host treats that threshold as absurdly low for an agency of DHS's size and says it created a massive administrative bottleneck. Axios reported a mountain of backed-up contracts and invoices, while DHS defended the policy as a way to fight waste, fraud, and abuse, claiming it saved more than $10 billion. The host is openly skeptical, noting that critics say the move made basic department functions nearly impossible. Some vendors allegedly began invoicing in chunks of $99,999.99 just to avoid the approval requirement. A source described the department as a giant shit show, warning the damage could be felt for years. The consequences reportedly extend to FEMA, where Senate Democrats say more than 1,000 grants, contracts, and funding awards worth tens of millions of dollars were delayed, slowing recovery after disasters. Delays averaged 3 weeks or longer, directly contradicting DHS claims that nothing sat on Noem's desk for more than 24 hours. Trump's own priorities were also hit. Despite funding for nearly 2,000 miles of border wall through his big beautiful bill, only 36 miles were complete by mid-February. ICE detention facilities in Texas, Montana, and New Jersey were also reportedly awaiting contract renewals and payment. The host then widens the scandal through Corey Lewandowski, described as Noem's top aide, and according to rumor he crudely references her affair partner. Noem told the Senate Judiciary Committee that Lewandowski had no role in approving contracts, but ProPublica reportedly obtained records showing he personally approved a multi-million-dollar equipment contract and numerous others. Senator Richard Blumenthal has said he will investigate whether Noem committed perjury. The host argues the dysfunction was not merely bureaucratic. It was performative and self-serving. He points to 2,500 branded ICE trucks and SUVs that reportedly sit unused because agents warned marked vehicles would make them targets. He also highlights a luxury jet DHS tried to buy for $70 million, featuring a bedroom, showers. Section 9. Corruption claims, military housing, and the Epstein fallout. The host pushes further, arguing that Noem's tenure fits a broader Trump administration culture of corruption. He points to a $200 million DHS advertising campaign that critics say served not just to encourage self-deportation, but to boost Noem's own image. According to reporting, One contract tied to a Mount Rushmore photoshoot with Noem involved a politically connected firm not properly listed in public documentation. He adds that another contract, worth $250,000, went to a Republican consulting firm with a bid window of only 31 hours and explicitly sought a contractor skilled at promoting Trump administration policies in the media. Yet he says Noem is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Trump himself is accused of enriching his family by billions and once told the New York Times, according to the host, that he found out nobody cared and he was allowed to. The host also names Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and Attorney General Pam Bondi as examples of officials facing conflict of interest or insider trading-style scrutiny. Bondi then becomes the center of the next turn. The New York Times reported that she quietly relocated to a military base in the Washington area because of threats from drug cartels and from people angry about her handling of the Epstein files. The host says Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Kristi Noem have also moved into secure military facilities. He notes that political appointees living on military bases is not unheard of, but says this administration appears to be the first to do so on such a broad scale, and questions remain about what they are paying, if anything. The host's tone becomes especially scathing around the Epstein story. Bondi faces impeachment articles accusing her of illegally withholding the files to protect abusers and appease Trump. She has also been subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee, and Chairman James Comer is reportedly trying to schedule her testimony. Meanwhile, the committee deposed Epstein's longtime accountant to investigate how Epstein made his money. Democrats called that accountant a central facilitator of Epstein's exploitation network. The host's underlying point is that the administration projects toughness and secrecy while relying on taxpayer-funded protection and facing deepening questions about what it is hiding. In his framing, the military housing story symbolizes the larger contradiction: officials who claim to defend. Section 10. UK Epstein files and a massive social security data alarm. The episode closes on two separate but thematically linked stories about elite accountability and institutional failure. First, the host contrasts the U.S. handling of Epstein-related matters with new disclosures out of the UK British Files Centre on Peter Mandelson, the former ambassador to the United States, who was ousted over Epstein ties and later resigned from the Labour Party. The files reportedly suggest Mandelson received tens of thousands of dollars from Epstein, advised him on government policy, and stayed at Epstein's house after Epstein's 2008 conviction. They also connect him to meetings involving Tony Blair and to an ocean conservation group tied to Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein funding. The host says Prime Minister Keir Starmer is under pressure because documents show he was warned that appointing Mandelson created reputational risk. Conservatives argue the record contradicts Starmer's claim that he was misled and did not know the full extent of the connection. Starmer's allies say the files do not reveal everything and insist Mandelson deceived the government. The host marvels at the contrast with the United States, where he says figures named repeatedly in Epstein materials remain politically untouched, while a British Prime Minister could be weakened simply for appointing someone with known ties. He then pivots to an alarming whistleblower complaint involving Social Security data. According to the host, a former Doge engineer who later became a government contractor claimed to possess two highly restricted SSA databases, New Mutant and the Master Death File, with at least one carried on a thumb drive. Those systems reportedly contain Social Security numbers, birth dates, birthplaces, and parental information for more than 500 million living and dead Americans. The whistleblower alleged the engineer wanted help transferring the data to a personal computer so he could sanitize it before using it at his new employer. One colleague refused because it would be illegal, but the host says the engineer allegedly believed a presidential pardon would protect him if trouble arose. There is no confirmed evidence that the data was successfully uploaded, and the engineer's lawyer denies wrongdoing. Still, the Government Accountability Office has reportedly launched an audit, and the host notes that the SSA and associated companies deny knowledge of the complaint. He closes by stressing that this is not an isolated concern. Earlier reports alleged Doge personnel uploaded sensitive Social Security